"You don't belong in this seat." Those 6 words, spat out in the hushed luxury of a first-class cabin, triggered a chain reaction that would obliterate careers, shatter reputations, and bring a billion-dollar airline to its knees. They looked at her and saw an obstacle, a woman they could bully into submission. They didn't realize they were staring down the barrel of the most powerful legal mind in the aviation industry. They thought they were removing a passenger. They had no idea they were about to accidentally fire themselves. Watch closely, because the silence after she makes the call. That is the sound of absolute, brutal karma. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of Terminal 4 at JFK, a rhythmic drumming that usually soothed Dr. Ophelia James. Today, however, it felt like a warning. Ophelia adjusted the collar of her beige trench coat. She wasn't dressed like the other passengers lounging in the exclusive Diamond Sky Club. She wore comfortable joggers, an oversized hoodie from her alma mater, Yale, and no makeup. After a 70-hour work week negotiating a hostile merger for a tech giant in Silicon Valley, she didn't care about looking the part. She just wanted to sleep. She looked down at her boarding pass. Seat 1A. The golden ticket on Apex Meridian Airlines Flight 404 to London. "Final boarding call for first class," the gate agent announced, her voice clipped. Ophelia picked up her worn leather duffel bag, a vintage piece worth more than a small car, though you wouldn't know it from the scuffs, and walked to the gate. As she scanned her pass, the machine beeped a crisp green. "Welcome aboard, Miss James," the agent said, though her eyes lingered a second too long on Ophelia's hoodie. "Turn left at the door." The cabin was a sanctuary of soft, ambient lighting and the scent of expensive bergamot. Ophelia found 1A, a private suite with a sliding door and a lie-flat bed. She stowed her bag, sat down, and accepted a glass of champagne from a flight attendant who smiled with the kind of practiced warmth that didn't reach his eyes. His name tag read Greg. "Champagne, ma'am?" "Before we get the riffraff on board," Greg joked, a little too comfortably. Ophelia offered a polite, tight smile. "Just water, please. I'm planning to sleep the whole way." "Suit yourself." Greg whisked the crystal flute away, his demeanor cooling instantly. Ophelia closed her eyes, letting the hum of the auxiliary power unit lull her. She was almost asleep when the commotion started. It wasn't a shout, but the sharp, piercing tone of a voice that was used to being obeyed. "This is ridiculous. I specifically requested the bulkhead suite. My husband is a platinum key holder. Do you know what that means?" Ophelia opened one eye. Standing in the aisle was a woman who looked like she had been cut out of a luxury lifestyle magazine and pasted into reality. She wore a white Chanel suit that looked dangerously impractical for travel, dripping in gold jewelry. Her blonde hair was lacquered into a helmet of perfection. This was Beatrice van der Hoeven. Behind her, looking apologetic but mostly terrified, was a younger man carrying her excessive number of shopping bags. Greg, the flight attendant, rushed over, his earlier coolness replaced by a fawning, oily subservience. "Mrs. van der Hoeven, so good to see you again. Is there a problem?" "There is a massive problem, Greg," Beatrice snapped, pointing a manicured finger at Ophelia's suite. "That is my seat. 1A. I always sit in 1A. It has the extra legroom for my bag." Greg looked at his manifest, then at Ophelia, then back at Beatrice. "Ah, I see. Well, seat 1A is currently occupied, Mrs. van der Hoeven. You are assigned to 2A. It's the exact same suite, just one row behind." "I don't want 2A, Beatrice hissed, leaning in close to Greg, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that Ophelia could hear perfectly. "I want 1A, and looking at who is currently squatting in it, surely we can make an arrangement. I mean, does she even look like she belongs in the first-class cabin? She looks like she got lost on her way to economy basic." Ophelia felt her heart rate slow down. It was a physical reaction she had trained herself into over 20 years of high-stakes litigation. When the enemy reveals their hand, you don't get angry. You get cold. Greg glanced at Ophelia. He took in the hoodie, the joggers, the messy bun. Then he looked back at Beatrice's Chanel suit and the platinum tag on her bag. The calculation in his eyes was naked and insulting. He made a choice. He walked over to Ophelia's suite and tapped on the partition wall. "Ma'am?" Greg said. His voice had lost all trace of hospitality. It was the voice of a bouncer kicking out a drunk. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Ophelia didn't move. She didn't reach for her bag. She just turned her head slowly and locked eyes with him. "You scanned it at the door, Greg. I'm in the correct seat. There seems to be a computer error." Greg lied. The smoothness of it was almost impressive. "We have a double booking. This seat is reserved for a high-priority loyalty member. I'm going to have to ask you to move." "Move where?" Ophelia asked calmly. "We have a lovely seat available in Economy Plus," Greg said, smiling as if he were offering her a gift. "We will, of course, refund the difference in ticket price." Ophelia unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She was tall, 5'10", and even in sneakers, she looked Greg dead in the eye. "I paid full fare for this seat, Greg. $5,400. I am not moving to economy, and I am certainly not moving because Mrs. van der Hoven prefers the view from row 1. Beatrice gasped audibly. "She knows my name. Stalker." "I can read the luggage tag you're shoving in everyone's face," Ophelia said dryly. Greg's face turned a blotchy red. "Ma'am, you are causing a scene. If you do not cooperate, I will have to classify this as a security disturbance." "A security disturbance?" Ophelia laughed, a low, humorless sound. "For sitting in the seat I paid for? Go ahead, Greg. Call the captain. In fact, call the gate agent back down here. I want everything on the record." Beatrice stepped forward, invading Ophelia's personal space. The smell of overly sweet perfume was suffocating. "Listen to me, you little urchin. My husband is friends with the VP of operations for this airline. If you don't grab your trash bag and get to the back of the plane, I will make sure you are blacklisted from flying ever again. Now be a good girl and move." Ophelia looked at Beatrice. Then she looked at Greg, who was crossing his arms, waiting for her to submit. "No," Ophelia said. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with tension. The other first-class passengers were peeking over their partitions, sensing blood in the water. "Right," Greg said, snapping his fingers. "That's it. I'm getting the captain." As Greg stormed toward the cockpit, Ophelia sat back down, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it. She didn't open Twitter. She didn't open Instagram. She opened a secure contact list. Her thumb hovered over a name that wasn't saved as a name, but as a priority code, Red Actual. She waited. The game had just begun. Captain Richard Sterling was a man who prided himself on efficiency. He wanted an on-time departure. He did not want drama. When Greg burst into the cockpit, complaining about a belligerent, non-compliant passenger in 1A who might be intoxicated, Sterling's patience evaporated. "Intoxicated?" Sterling asked, checking his watch. "We push back in 8 minutes, Greg." "She's refusing crew instructions, Captain," Greg panted, playing up the distress. "And she's aggressive toward Mrs. van der Hoven, our Platinum Key VIP. I don't feel safe with her in the cabin." That was the magic phrase. "I don't feel safe." In the post-9/11 world, those words gave the crew nearly unlimited power. Captain Sterling sighed, unbuckled, and put on his hat. "Fine, I'll handle it." Back in the cabin, the atmosphere was toxic. Beatrice was now loudly talking on her phone, ensuring Ophelia could hear every word. "Yes, darling. Some person is refusing to give up my seat. It's appalling. The crew is terrified of her. Yes, I'm sure she's on drugs." Ophelia remained motionless, staring out the window at the rain. She was mentally reciting the Apex Meridian Contract of Carriage, Section 14, Paragraph 3, regarding involuntary denied boarding. She knew the law better than the pilots knew the flight manual. When Captain Sterling arrived, he didn't introduce himself. He loomed over Ophelia's suite. He saw a black woman in a hoodie and joggers, sitting with a stoic expression. And he made the same fatal calculation Greg had. He saw problem, not passenger. "Mum," Sterling barked. "Grab your things. You're off the flight." Ophelia turned to him. "Captain. Sterling, is it?" She glanced at his wings. "I have broken no rules. I am sober. I am quiet. I am in my assigned seat. Your flight attendant is trying to illegally downgrade me to accommodate a passenger who boarded after me. That is a violation of federal aviation regulations and your own company policy." Sterling was taken aback. Her voice wasn't slurred or angry. It was precise, clinical. "I don't care about your interpretation of the rules," Sterling said, stepping closer to intimidate her. "The flight attendant says you are a safety risk. As the captain, my word is law. You leave now, or I call the Port Authority police to drag you off in handcuffs. Is that what you want? A criminal record over a seat?" "I already have a record, Captain," Ophelia said softly. "A record of winning." "Get the police!" Beatrice shouted from the aisle. "Get them! She threatened me!" Greg nodded vigorously. "I heard it, Captain. She said she'd make us pay." Ophelia stood up again. She picked up her phone. "Captain, before you make a decision that will end your career, I am asking you one last time. Check the manifest. Look at the notes attached to my booking reference. Not the passenger manifest Greg has, the master manifest on your iPad." "I don't have time for this," Sterling snapped. He keyed his radio. "Tower, this is Apex 404. We need Port Authority law enforcement at Gate B12, immediately. Disruptive passenger." The die was cast. Ophelia nodded slowly. "Okay, you called your backup. Now I'm going to call mine." She tapped the screen. She didn't put the phone to her ear. She put it on speaker, holding it flat in her palm like a weapon. It rang once. A voice answered. It wasn't a secretary. It was a deep, gravelly voice that sounded like it had been smoking cigars in boardrooms for 40 years. "Ophelia? This is a surprise. I thought you were wheels up to London. Are you bringing me bad news about the merger?" The entire cabin went silent. Even Beatrice stopped whispering. The voice on the phone was loud, clear, and unmistakably authoritative. "Hello, Alistair," Ophelia said, her eyes locked on Captain Sterling, whose face had just gone pale. "No bad news about the merger, but I do have some bad news about your airline." Captain Sterling froze. He knew that voice. Every pilot at Apex Meridian knew that voice. It was the voice that welcomed them in the training videos. It was the voice that signed the annual Christmas emails. It was Alistair P. Harrington, the CEO of Apex Meridian. "What's going on, Ophelia?" Alistair asked, his tone shifting from friendly to razor-sharp. "Why aren't you in the air?" "Well, Alistair," Ophelia said, "I'm currently being threatened with arrest by your Captain Sterling and his lead flight attendant, Greg. Apparently, my seat, 1A, is needed for a Mrs. van der Hoven, because she doesn't like the look of me. And according to your staff, I don't fit the demographic of a first-class passenger." There was a silence on the line, so profound it felt like the air pressure in the cabin had dropped. "Put the captain on," Alistair said. The voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. Ophelia held the phone out to Sterling. "It's for you." Sterling's hands were shaking as he reached for the device. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. Mr. Harrington?" Sterling stammered. "Captain," Alistair's voice boomed. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. The woman you are threatening to arrest is Dr. Ophelia James. She is not just a passenger. She is the Chief External Auditor for the Apex Board of Directors. She is currently leading the investigation into our company's discriminatory practices, an investigation I personally authorized, and you just gave her Exhibit A." Beatrice's jaw dropped. Greg looked like he was going to vomit. "Captain," Alistair continued, "is the police on the way?" "Yes, sir," Sterling whispered. "I called them." "Good," Alistair said. "Keep them there. But they aren't coming for her. They're coming to escort you, your flight attendant, and that gate agent off my plane. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Do not touch the controls. Do not speak to the passengers. Just sit there and wait for the new crew I'm sending over." The line went dead. Ophelia took her phone back from the trembling captain. She sat back down, crossed her legs, and looked at Beatrice, whose face was now a mask of horror. "So," Ophelia said, her voice smooth as silk, "about that seat swap. I think I'll stay right here." The minutes that followed Alistair Harrington's call were agonizingly slow, a masterclass in suffocating tension. The first-class cabin, usually a hub of soft whispers and clinking glass, was now a tomb. Captain Richard Sterling sat in the cockpit, staring at the instrument panel that was no longer his to command. His hands were gripping his knees so hard his knuckles had turned white. Beside him, the first officer, a young man named David, who had wisely stayed silent during the entire altercation, stared straight ahead, terrified that guilt by association would end his career before it began. In the cabin, Greg, the lead flight attendant, had backed himself into the galley. He was frantically scrolling through his Union handbook on his iPad, his face a sheen of sweat. He kept glancing at Ophelia, hoping for a crack in her armor, a sign that she might be merciful. She gave him nothing. Ophelia had returned to her work. She had pulled a slim laptop from her bag and was typing furiously, the click-clack of the keys the only sound in the plane. Beatrice van der Hoeven was vibrating with indignation. She had pulled her knees up to her chest in seat 2A, clutching her phone. She was texting her husband, Charles, a barrage of messages. "They are threatening me, Charles. Some woman in a hoodie. The captain is terrified of her. You need to call the VP of Operations now." She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear. Finally, a reply came. "I'm calling now. Stay put. Don't say another word to anyone." Beatrice smirked. She looked at Ophelia's back. "You're done," she thought. "Charles is fixing it." Then, the heavy thud of boots on the jet bridge echoed through the open door. 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department stepped onto the plane. Behind them was a man in a sharp black suit, the station manager for Apex Meridian at JFK. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. "Where is Captain Sterling?" one of the officers, a burly man with the name tag Sergeant Miller, demanded. Greg pointed shakily toward the cockpit. The station manager, whose name was Peter, stopped at Ophelia's suite. He didn't ask for her pass. He bowed his head slightly. "Dr. James, on behalf of Apex Meridian, I am profoundly sorry for this incident. Mr. Harrington has briefed me. We have a new crew en route. They will be here in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Peter," Ophelia said, not looking up from her screen. "Please ensure the transition is handled quietly. I'd like to get some sleep, eventually." "Of course." Peter walked to the cockpit. The door was open. The entire first-class cabin leaned forward to hear. "Captain Sterling," Peter said, his voice trembling but firm, "please gather your flight bag. You are relieved of command. You need to surrender your ID badge and airport security credentials to Sergeant Miller immediately." "This is insane," Sterling shouted, standing up and hitting his head on the overhead panel. "I am the captain of this vessel. I have a disruptive passenger who—" "The only disruptive element on this plane is you, Richard," Peter cut in. "Mr. Harrington heard everything. He heard you threaten a federal auditor with arrest for sitting in her assigned seat. You violated the Pilot Code of Conduct, the anti-discrimination policy, and about 6 different federal laws regarding passenger rights. Now give me the badge, or Sergeant Miller will take it from you." Sterling looked at the police officer. Sergeant Miller rested his hand casually on his belt. The implication was clear. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Slowly, painfully, Captain Sterling unclipped his ID badge, the symbol of his authority, his access, his life, and handed it to the station manager. He picked up his bag. "And you," Peter said, turning to Greg in the galley. "Pack your things. You're off too." Greg let out a sob. "I was just following protocol. Mrs. van der Hoven, said." "You profiled a passenger based on her appearance," Peter snapped. "You initiated an involuntary denied boarding process without cause. Hand over your badge." The walk of shame was brutal. Captain Sterling, stripped of his credentials, had to walk down the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin. He had to walk past the wealthy passengers who were now looking at him with disdain. He had to walk past Beatrice van der Hoven, who looked away, refusing to make eye contact with the man she had incited. And he had to walk past Ophelia James. As he passed seat 1A, Sterling paused. He looked down at Ophelia. For a second, it looked like he might say something. An apology, a curse, a plea. Ophelia paused her typing. She took a sip of water. She didn't look up. Sterling walked off the plane. Greg followed, weeping openly into a napkin. The silence returned, but this time the energy had shifted. The power vacuum had been filled. Ophelia James was the captain now. Beatrice sat in 2A, frozen. She realized with a dawning horror that the crew, her allies, her weapons, had just been liquidated. She was alone in a metal tube with the woman she had tried to destroy. She reached for her bag, thinking about fleeing. "I wouldn't leave if I were you, Mrs. van der Hoven," Ophelia said. She hadn't turned around. Her voice was calm, melodic, and terrifying. Beatrice froze. "Excuse me?" Ophelia swiveled her chair around to face her. "The doors are still open. You could leave. But if you deplane now, it counts as a voluntary cancellation. You'll lose your ticket value. And considering my team is currently pulling the surveillance footage from the gate to add to your file, fleeing the scene might look like an admission of guilt. I'd stay for the flight. The champagne is actually quite good." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She slumped back into her seat, defeated. The replacement crew arrived 18 minutes later. They were a stark contrast to the previous team. The new captain, Serafina Jenkins, was a veteran pilot known for her cool head. The flight attendants were efficient, polite, and terrified. They knew exactly who was in Seat 1A. The service on the flight to London was surreal. The flight attendants tiptoed around Ophelia as if she were made of glass. "Dr. James, may I get you a fresh pillow?" "Dr. James, the chef has prepared a special tasting menu. Would you like to see it?" "Dr. James, is the cabin temperature to your liking?" Ophelia was gracious, but distant. She accepted the water, declined the wine, and kept working. Across the aisle, in seat 1B, the aisle seat next to Ophelia's suite, sat a young man named Liam. He was a tech entrepreneur, wearing a hoodie similar to Ophelia's. He had watched the entire saga unfold with wide eyes. Once the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign pinged off, Liam leaned over the divider. "I have to ask," he whispered. "Who are you? I heard the CEO call you, but you took out a captain without raising your voice. That was the most gangster thing I've ever seen." Ophelia smiled, a genuine smile this time. She closed her laptop. "I'm just an auditor, Liam. I look for mistakes. Today, I found a big one." "An auditor?" Liam laughed. "Right. And John Wick was just a dog lover. What are you actually working on, or is it classified?" Ophelia glanced at Beatrice, who was pretending to sleep in the row behind them, her eye mask pulled down tight. "It's not classified," Ophelia said, loud enough for Beatrice to hear. I specialize in corporate risk management, specifically the financial risk caused by toxic corporate culture. You see, when a company allows its employees to treat customers with bias, it exposes the firm to massive liability. My job is to quantify that liability. She tapped her laptop lid. I was sent to London to audit the European division, but it seems the investigation started early. I've just been compiling a report on the incident at the gate. By the time we land in Heathrow, the board of directors will have a preliminary draft. So, Liam whispered, gesturing with his thumb toward Beatrice behind them. What happens to her? Her? Ophelia glanced back. Mrs. van der Hoeven isn't my concern. She's a customer. The airline can choose to ban her or keep her. My concern is the system that allowed her to think she had the power to move me. But Ophelia knew that wasn't entirely true. She checked her phone. She had Wi-Fi. An email had just landed in her inbox from Alistair Harrington. Subject: status update. Ophelia, Sterling is in a debrief room with HR. He's blaming the passenger in 2A. Says she invoked the name of Charles van der Hoeven, our VP of North American Sales. Says he felt pressured to comply because of the connection. If this goes up the chain to Charles, we have a bigger problem than a rude pilot. Charles has been blocking your diversity audits for 6 months. This might be the leverage we need. Land safely. We have a war room set up at the London office. Ophelia's eyes narrowed. So that was the connection. Beatrice wasn't just a wealthy passenger. She was the wife of the man Ophelia had been fighting for half a year, Charles van der Hoeven, the man who called diversity initiatives a waste of shareholder value. The karma wasn't just hitting a pilot, it was aiming for the top. Ophelia opened a new document. She typed a new header, investigation file, C. van der Hoeven, conflict of interest and abuse of corporate privilege. She began to type. The flight was 7 hours long. She had plenty of time to build the coffin. Meanwhile, Beatrice was not sleeping. She was under her blanket, frantically texting Charles on the in-flight Wi-Fi. Beatrice: Charles, it's a nightmare. They fired the crew. The new crew is ignoring me. That woman knows who you are. You have to stop her. Charles: I'm trying, B. But Alistair Harrington is personally involved. He's locked me out of the incident report. Who is this woman? Did you get her name? Beatrice: Ophelia James. She said she's an auditor. There was a long pause. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared for 5 minutes. Charles: do not speak to her. Do not look at her. Beatrice, you have to listen to me. Ophelia James is the grim reaper of the consulting world. She destroyed the CEO of Viridian Tech last year. If she connects you to me and uses this incident to prove I'm influencing operations for personal gain, I'm dead. We're dead. Beatrice dropped her phone. It slid off her lap and onto the floor. She stared at the back of seat 1A with sheer, unadulterated terror. She hadn't just picked a fight with a passenger. She had picked a fight with the executioner. While the cabin of Flight 404 was a silent pressure cooker, the ground below was exploding. The internet moves faster than a Boeing 787. Unknown to Ophelia, Greg, or Captain Sterling, a passenger in seat 3A, a teenage girl named Sophie, who was an influencer with 3 million TikTok followers, had been recording from the moment Beatrice started shouting. She had captured everything. The sneering tone of Beatrice. Does she even look like she belongs here? The smug arrogance of Greg. We have a lovely seat in economy. The threat from Captain Sterling. I'll call the police. And the mic drop moment. Ophelia handing the phone to the captain and the colour draining from his face. Sophie had uploaded the video to TikTok 10 minutes before the doors closed. She captioned it. Apex Meridian just tried to kick a black woman out of first class for a Karen. Wait for the ending. Charge Karma, Gouache Ophelia James. By the time Flight 404 was over the Atlantic, the video had 12 million views. It was trending on Twitter X under Sechosach's boycott Apex and Ashsach's fire Sterling. CNN had picked it up. TMZ was running a background check on Beatrice. At the Apex Meridian headquarters in Chicago, Charles van der Hoeven was sweating through his Italian suit. He was in his corner office, watching the news on his wall-mounted TV. Viral video shows shocking discrimination aboard Apex Flight 404, the news anchor said. Internet sleuths have identified the aggressor as Beatrice van der Hoeven, wife of Apex executive Charles van der Hoeven. The airline's stock has dropped 4% in after-hours trading. Charles threw his coffee mug against the wall. It shattered, spraying dark roast over his framed diplomas. His intercom buzzed. It was his secretary. Her voice was shaking. "Mr. van der Hoeven, Mr. Harrington wants to see you in the boardroom. Immediately. He says to bring your company laptop and your keycard." Charles sank into his chair. "He's in London, Brenda. How can he see me?" "He's on video link, sir. And the entire board is with him." Charles looked at his reflection in the window. He looked old. He grabbed his laptop. He knew what was coming. He just hoped he could spin it. He hoped he could sacrifice Beatrice to save himself. She was the one screaming, he told himself. I wasn't even there. But as he walked to the elevator, his phone buzzed. A notification from the company's internal legal alert system. New priority case opened. Internal audit. Lead investigator, Dr. O. James. Subject, C. van der Hoeven. Allegation, gross misconduct, nepotism, discrimination. The elevator doors opened. Charles stepped inside. It felt like stepping into a hearse. High above the ocean, Ophelia closed her laptop. She stretched her arms. She didn't know about the TikTok video. She didn't know about the stock price. She just knew that she had finished her draft. She stood up to use the restroom. As she walked down the aisle, she passed Beatrice. Beatrice was staring out the window, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked up and met Ophelia's eyes. "I didn't know," Beatrice whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know who you were." Ophelia stopped. She looked down at the woman in the Chanel suit. "That's the problem, Beatrice," Ophelia said softly. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with human dignity. You thought I was nobody, so you treated me like garbage. If I had been a nobody, you would have won. You would have stolen my seat and ruined my trip. That is why you're crying. Not because you were wrong, but because you picked the wrong victim." "My husband," Beatrice sobbed. "He says you're going to ruin him." "I don't ruin people, Beatrice," Ophelia said, turning to walk away. "People ruin themselves. I just signed the paperwork." She walked into the lavatory and locked the door. She looked in the mirror. She splashed water on her face. She looked tired, but she wasn't done yet. The plane was landing in 2 hours, and she had a feeling the welcoming committee would be interesting. The descent into London Heathrow was turbulent, the plane buffeted by the grey, swirling winds typical of the English morning. But inside the cabin, the turbulence was entirely emotional. As the wheels touched down with a jarring thud, Captain Serafina Jenkins's voice came over the intercom. She sounded professional, but there was a tightness in her tone that Ophelia recognized immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been informed by airport authorities that there is a significant media presence at the gate. For the privacy and safety of all passengers, ground security will be boarding the aircraft to escort specific parties off first. Thank you for your patience." Ophelia looked out the window. It wasn't just a media presence. It was a circus. Flashing lights from police cruisers bounced off the wet tarmac. Dozens of cameras were set up behind the glass of the terminal. Liam, the tech entrepreneur in 1B, leaned over. He held up his phone. "Dr. James, you're trending #1 globally. The stock is down 12%. They're calling it the billion-dollar seat swap. You might want to put your hood up." Ophelia didn't put her hood up. She took a compact mirror from her bag and applied a layer of deep red lipstick. It was her war paint. "I have nothing to hide, Liam," she said, checking her reflection. "I'm not the villain of this story." The cabin door opened, but it wasn't the usual bridge operator. 2 bobbies, London Metropolitan Police officers, stepped aboard, followed by a woman in a crisp navy suit holding a clipboard. This was Elena Rostova, the head of Apex Meridian's crisis management team in Europe. Elena spotted Ophelia and walked straight to her, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of the other passengers. "Dr. James," Elena said, her Russian accent thick but precise. "Mr. Harrington is waiting for you in the private suite of the Windsor Lounge. We have a car waiting on the tarmac to bypass the terminal." "Thank you, Elena," Ophelia said, unbuckling. "However," Elena continued, turning her gaze to row 2, "we have a different protocol for Mrs. van der Hoven." Beatrice was currently trying to make herself as small as possible. She had pulled her scarf over her head. "Mrs. van der Hoven?" Elena said, her voice dropping to a chilly professional register. "Please gather your belongings. The police will escort you to a secure holding room. The press is aggressive, and your husband has requested you be kept in isolation until he can speak to you." "Isolation?" Beatrice squeaked. "Am I being arrested?" "Not by the police," Elena said cryptically. "But the airline has revoked your return ticket. You are currently stranded in the UK until further notice. Come with us, please." Beatrice stood up. Her legs were shaky. As she walked down the aisle, the silence was broken by a slow, deliberate sound. Clap, clap, clap. It was Sophie, the teenager in 3A. She was slow clapping. A few other passengers joined in. It wasn't a thunderous applause, but a smattering of judgment that stung worse than a slap. Beatrice kept her head down, tears dripping onto her Chanel suit, and hurried off the plane, flanked by police. Ophelia stood up. She hoisted her duffel bag. "Go get 'em, Doctor," Liam said, giving her a salute. Ophelia nodded. She walked to the door, stepped out into the cool London air, and descended the stairs to the waiting black Range Rover. Inside the car, the leather was soft and the windows were tinted pitch black. Elena sat opposite her. "Mr. Harrington is furious," Elena briefed her as the car sped across the tarmac, dodging baggage carts. "Not at you. At the situation. The board is panic-stricken. They want a head-on spike to appease the shareholders. They are currently debating whether it should be the captain, the flight attendant, or Charles van der Hoven." Ophelia looked out at the grey sky. Why choose? Why not all of them? Elena smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. "I like how you think, Dr. James. Here is the file on Charles. We pulled his expense reports and his communication logs with the New York crew." She handed Ophelia a thick manila folder. "He called the gate agent 5 minutes before you boarded," Elena said. "He authorized the upgrade for his wife personally. He overrode the system that showed Seat 1A was sold. He flagged you as a low-value flyer, based on your lack of recent activity, not knowing you fly private for work 90% of the time." Ophelia opened the file. There it was, a time-stamped log. User, C. van der Hoven, VP Ops. Action, Force, Override. Seat 1A. Note, just move the passenger. Give them miles. Beatrice wants the bulkhead. "He didn't just facilitate it," Ophelia murmured. "He ordered it." "He thought you were a nobody," Elena said. "He thought he was swatting a fly. He didn't know he was swatting a hornet." The car screeched to a halt outside a private VIP entrance. "They are waiting," Elena said. "Showtime." The private suite of the Windsor Lounge at Heathrow was less a waiting room and more a fortress of solitude designed for heads of state. The walls were panelled in sound-dampening walnut, the carpet was thick enough to silence footsteps, and the air was chilled to a precise, sterile 68 degrees. But despite the luxury, the room felt like a holding cell for the condemned, Ophelia James stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the grey expanse of the runway. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation at the gate, the flight, and the viral aftermath was beginning to curdle into a cold, sharp focus. She wasn't tired. She was calibrated. Elena Rostova, the crisis manager, sat at a glass table, her fingers flying across 2 different iPads. "The board is assembled in Chicago," Elena said, not looking up. "The mood is fracture. Half of them want blood to stop the stock bleeding. The other half, Charles's faction, are arguing that firing a VP over a customer service dispute sets a dangerous precedent. They are calling you an outside agitator." Ophelia turned from the window. "They can call me whatever they want. Did you get the encrypted file from the New York server?" "Received and decrypted," Elena said, finally looking up. Her expression was a mix of awe and fear. "Ophelia, if you show them this, there is no coming back. You aren't just getting him fired, you are sending him to federal prison." Ophelia picked up her laptop. "He sent himself, Elena. I'm just the courier." The heavy double doors opened. Alistair Harrington entered. The CEO of Apex Meridian looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 hours. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He carried the weight of a 100-year-old legacy that was currently trending on Twitter for all the wrong reasons. "Ophelia," Alistair said, his voice grave. "Thank you for doing this. I know you're exhausted." "I'm fine, Alistair," she said. "How is Charles?" "Confident," Alistair replied, pouring himself a glass of water with a shaking hand. "He's spinning this as a security issue. He claims you were aggressive, that Beatrice was the victim of a hostile passenger, and that Captain Sterling overreacted. He's trying to throw the pilots under the bus to save himself and his wife." "Predictable," Ophelia said. Alistair looked at her. "Margaret Vance is chairing the meeting. She's tough. She likes Charles. She views him as the son she never had. You need to be airtight. If you miss, even by an inch, they will bury you, and they will sue your firm for defamation." Ophelia walked to the head of the table and plugged her laptop into the console. The massive video wall at the far end of the room flickered to life. "Alistair," Ophelia said, her hand resting on the connection cable. "I don't miss." The screen illuminated the room with the harsh, fluorescent reality of the Chicago boardroom. 12 people sat around a massive oval table. At the far end sat Margaret Vance, a steel-haired matriarch of the aviation industry who was known for eating consultants for breakfast. To her right sat Charles Vander Hoven. Charles looked remarkably composed. He had changed his shirt, slicked back his hair, and was currently leaning over to whisper something to a board member, laughing as if the burning airline stock was a minor accounting error. When Ophelia and Alistair appeared on the screen, the laughter died. "Mr. Harrington," Margaret Vance said, her voice crackling through the high-fidelity speakers, and "Ms. James, we have reviewed the incident report. We have seen the TikTok video. It is regrettable. But we are here to discuss solutions, not engage in a witch hunt." Charles leaned into his microphone. He didn't look afraid. He looked bored. "Ms. James," Charles said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Let me start by apologizing for the confusion at JFK. My wife can be particular. However, I must express my concern that an external auditor felt empowered to commandeer a cockpit and intimidate my flight crew. We have protocols for a reason." Ophelia sat down. She didn't blink. She didn't open with a greeting. "Margaret," Ophelia said, ignoring Charles entirely. "I am not here to discuss protocols. I am here to present the preliminary findings of the audit I conducted on Flight 404. "This isn't an audit meeting," Charles snapped. "This is a crisis management meeting." "They are the same thing, Charles," Ophelia said calmly. Because the crisis isn't the video. The video is just a symptom. The crisis is you. A murmur went around the table in Chicago. Margaret Vance frowned. Ms. James, those are serious accusations. Charles has served this company for 20 years. And in the last 5 years, Ophelia said, tapping a key, he has treated it as his personal piggy bank. The screen in Chicago split. On one side was the video feed of Ophelia. On the other, a spreadsheet filled with red lines appeared. Exhibit A, Ophelia narrated, her voice steady and clinical. The Vander Hoven override. Corporate policy allows VPs to authorize seat upgrades for family members on a space-available basis. Space available, meaning if the seat is empty. She highlighted a column. On 42 separate occasions in the last fiscal year, Charles Vander Hoven issued a Code Red override. This code forcibly removes a paying passenger to clear a seat. It is designed for federal air marshals or emergency crew transport. Charles used it to bump paying customers for his wife, his golf partners, and on 3 occasions, his interior decorator. Charles's face flushed slightly. Those were strategic partners. We were conducting business. At Disney World, Ophelia asked. Because that's where the interior decorator was flying. Margaret Vance put on her glasses, leaning closer to the screen. Charles, is this accurate? Did you bump revenue passengers? It's a misunderstanding of the code, Margaret, Charles sputtered. I authorized the miles to compensate them. It cost the company nothing. Incorrect, Ophelia cut in. I ran the numbers during the flight. The cost of refunding those tickets, plus the apology miles, plus the legal settlements paid to 2 passengers who sued for discrimination last year. Settlements you signed off on quietly to keep them out of the press. Totals $4.2 million. The room in Chicago went silent. $4.2 million was not a misunderstanding. It was a hole in the hull. But that's not the reason he should be fired, Ophelia said, sensing the blood in the water. That's just incompetence. What I found next is fraud. Charles stood up. I will not sit here and be slandered by a freelancer. Margaret, cut the feed. Sit down, Charles, Margaret barked, slamming her hand on the table. She looked at the screen. Continue, Ms. James. Ophelia brought up a new slide. It was a complex web of booking references. While investigating the override pattern, I found a recurring anomaly, Ophelia explained. A series of 20 ghost bookings on the London to Dubai route. First-class suites booked under the name C. Hoven Consulting. These seats were paid for by Apex Meridian's marketing budget as influencer partnerships. Ophelia paused for effect. But no influencers ever sat in them. The seats flew empty, yet the tickets were marked as flown in the system to trigger the loyalty points distribution. She looked directly at Charles, who was now gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Those points, millions of them, were then transferred to a third-party account, Ophelia said. An account registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, a company that, according to the incorporation documents I pulled 30 minutes ago, lists Beatrice Vander Hoven as the sole beneficiary. The gasp in the Chicago boardroom was audible even through the microphone. You were embezzling loyalty points, Ophelia said, driving the nail in. Converting corporate assets into millions of dollars of transferable miles, which your wife then sold on the grey market to ticket brokers. I estimate the total value of the theft at $12 million over 3 years. Charles was trembling. He looked at Margaret. Margaret, it's complex. The loyalty program is— Shut up, Margaret whispered. She looked horrifying. She looked like a woman realizing she had been nurturing a viper. Ophelia closed her laptop. The screen went black, leaving only her face on the video wall. The video of your wife abusing a passenger is bad PR, Charles. But embezzlement, that's 15 to 20 years in federal prison. And if the board doesn't act immediately, they are complicit in financial fraud. She leaned back in her chair. My recommendation is immediate termination for cause, forfeiture of all severance, and a referral to the FBI. That is the only way to save the stock price when the market opens tomorrow. The silence in the Windsor lounge was absolute. Alistair Harrington looked at Ophelia with a mixture of terror and profound respect. She hadn't just won. She had annihilated the enemy. In Chicago, Margaret Vance stood up. She didn't look at Charles. She looked at the two security guards standing by the door. "Escort Mr. van der Hoeven to his office," she said, her voice icy. "Watch him pack his personal effects. Take his phone, his laptop, and his badge. Then remove him from the building." "You can't do this!" Charles screamed, his composure finally shattering. "I built this operations department. You need me. This is a setup." "You're done, Charles," Margaret said. "Get him out." As the security guards grabbed Charles by the arms, a poetic mirror image of the threat he had made against Ophelia, he looked at the camera. He looked at Ophelia. His eyes were wild, desperate. "You ruined my life," he shouted as they dragged him toward the door. "Do you hear me? You ruined everything." Ophelia watched him go. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply pressed the mute button on her console so she didn't have to hear his final, pathetic pleas. When the door in Chicago slammed shut, the tension in the room broke. Margaret Vance sat back down, rubbing her temples. The other board members were frantically typing on their phones, likely calling their lawyers. "Ms. James," Margaret said, her voice weary. "You have saved us from a catastrophe. If this had come out in a federal audit instead of an internal one, we would have lost our operating license." "You're welcome, Margaret," Ophelia said. "We need to make this right," Margaret continued. "Alistair tells me you are a singular talent. We have a vacancy on the board now, a seat that specializes in governance and ethics. It's yours. Name your retainer." Ophelia looked at Alistair. He nodded. "I'll take the seat," Ophelia said. "But my retainer isn't money. I want full autonomy to restructure the passenger rights protocol. I want a mandatory zero-tolerance policy for staff abuse, written into the employee contract. And I want one more thing. Anything," Margaret said. "Beatrice van der Hoeven," Ophelia said. "She is currently sitting in a holding room at Heathrow. I want her banned, permanently. Not just from Apex, but from the entire SkyTeam Alliance. I want her to know that every time she looks at a plane, she is reminded that she does not belong on it." "Consider it done," Margaret said. "I'll issue the blacklist order myself." The screen went dark. The meeting was over. Alistair Harrington let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a year. He walked over to Ophelia and extended his hand. "I've seen hostile takeovers, union strikes, and engine failures," Alistair said. "But I have never seen anyone dismantle a man like that. You are the most terrifying person I have ever met, Ophelia." Ophelia took his hand. Her grip was firm, but her hand was warm. "I'm not terrifying, Alistair," she said softly. "I'm just thorough. Now, if you don't mind, I have a flight to catch. I believe I have a seat waiting for me." 3 days later, the storm had passed, but the landscape had changed forever. Ophelia James stood at the curb of JFK Terminal 4, the same place where the nightmare had begun. The rain had stopped. The sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. She wasn't wearing the hoodie this time. She wore a tailored charcoal trench coat, dark sunglasses, and carried the same battered leather duffel bag. As she walked toward the first-class check-in, the atmosphere was different. The staff seemed sharper, more attentive. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of accountability. She approached the counter. The agent, a young woman named Serafina, looked up. Her eyes went wide. She recognized Ophelia instantly. Every airline employee in the world recognized her now. The internal memo sent out by Alistair Harrington had featured Ophelia's photo with the caption, "The New Standard." "Dr. James," Serafina said, scrambling to stand up. "It is an honor, truly. We have you pre-checked. Mr. Harrington has blocked out the entire first row for your privacy." Ophelia lowered her sunglasses. "That won't be necessary, Serafina. I don't need special treatment. I just need the seat I paid for." "Of course," Serafina said, printing the boarding pass with reverence. "Seat 1A. The gate is ready for you." Ophelia took the pass. She walked through security, where even the TSA agents gave her respectful nods. She walked down the jet bridge, the sound of her heels clicking on the metal floor echoing like a victory march. She stepped onto the plane. The new flight director, a man named Marcus, greeted her with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome back, Dr. James," he said. Ophelia turned left. She walked to seat 1A. It was just a seat, leather, plastic, and metal. But as she sat down, it felt like a throne. She stowed her bag. She settled in. Across the aisle, in seat 1B, a businessman was loudly complaining on his phone about the Wi-Fi. "I'm a gold member," he shouted into his phone. "Do you know who I am?" Ophelia turned her head slowly. She looked at him. The businessman caught her eye. He froze. He recognized her from the news. He saw the woman who had fired a VP, banned a socialite, and reshaped $1 billion company in an afternoon. He slowly lowered his phone. He whispered into the receiver, I have to go. I'll call you back." He sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and stared straight ahead in terrified silence. Ophelia smiled. She leaned back and closed her eyes. "Champagne, Dr. James?" Marcus asked, appearing at her side with a crystal flute. Ophelia opened one eye. She thought about the rain, the insults, the screams of Charles van der Hoven, and the silence of the boardroom. "Yes, Marcus," she said. "I think I've earned it." She took the glass. She looked out the window as the engines roared to life, a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through her bones. The plane began to move, pushing back from the gate, ready to rise above the clouds. The seat was hers. The victory was hers. And as the plane thundered down the runway and lifted into the sky, Ophelia James finally, peacefully, went to sleep. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you never judge a book by its cover. And why you certainly never judge a passenger by their hoodie. Beatrice van der Hoven and her husband thought their platinum status made them untouchable. They learned the hard way that true power isn't about shouting at staff. It's about knowing the rules better than the people trying to break them. Ophelia didn't just win a seat. She cleaned house. If you enjoyed this story of massive corporate karma, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story, where arrogance meets reality. What would you have done in seat 1A? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next one.